John Oldham on Radio Winchcombe.
2016.
Good morning. Well, I'm very pleased to be joined on the programme by Burchardt, and you've got this interesting book which is part of a trilogy. Tell us about it.
Yes, it's a trilogy set in the Languedoc region of France, which I know very well because I spent a long time working and living there. And it's, in a sense, it's unusual because the bookshops in England are full of books which are written by English people who go over there buying cheap houses, renovating them, having terrible disasters, not speaking French, and then after a few years they either have to come back or they have to integrate against their will, and they never really learn French. And so, as I said, there are lots and lots of books like that. There are lots of other books which are about people who go to Paris and fall in love with a wonderful French girl. This is not one of those.
So what makes yours different?
Mine is different because I grew up in France. I was educated in France. I know I don't sound like a French person, but I can still do the French accent. I won't do it here.
A lot better than I can.
So my books are actually written from inside of France. And France of Paris and the France of rural areas are radically different. The population is of a completely different mindset. So when one writes about rural France, one really has to take into account the kind of attachment that people have there to their soil, to their traditions, to their families, to their customs. And quite often when a stranger comes into that, although in the street everybody's terribly friendly to them, behind closed doors, it's a completely different story.
So do you have two audiences? I mean, do you have like your English audience, but also you've got to bear in mind, they might read the book, and how would they sort of react to how you've written about them?
Yes, it's very much a look behind closed doors of the French rural population, because across France you have this very strong village tradition. I mean, in England you don't have real villages anymore. In France you really, really do have the village traditions. My brother lives near Toulouse in a village, and they have what they call the bal musette, where everybody goes and dances. And it's like out of a Fellini film. It's like from the 1940s and the 50s. But the French are very attached to that. So each region has their own food, each region has their own traditions. And this is what quite often the English don't realise. And although they want to integrate, they actually can't. So my books are anchored in these rural communities and how they feel about a foreigner buying the chateau in their village. The local owner whose family owned the chateau since before the Middle Ages has gone bankrupt due to a city wife who spent all his money.
And this is covered, is it, in the first book, which is The Fool's House?
Yeah. And so he has to sell this chateau to a retired professor. And the book is actually told through the eyes of a woman called Leah, who is married to an Englishman, admittedly. The old man invites them to the chateau because he wants to sell some books. And when they arrive, the chateau is completely empty. This old man is living in a completely empty chateau. There is nothing except the books and a few old carpets in it. And so the young woman, who is very sensitive, senses that something strange has happened, especially when the old man, in a very cavalier fashion, says, "My wife has left, my maid has left, both on the same day, and now I'm living like this." And so Leah, the young woman, as she's kind of moving about the chateau, suddenly realises something very strange has happened here. It's as if the walls were speaking to her. And the book basically is her discovery of what has happened.
Now, I mean, when it's a trilogy like it is, you have to think ahead, I presume, in terms of where the plot's going to go.
You do. The next book, which is going to come out in the spring, is in a neighbouring village and has a different central character. It still has the Leah character, but she's much more on the margins, if you like. She is a sort of fil rouge, as they say, a thread going through it. But the next book is another situation but very much in the same landscape, in the same type of community, and just in a neighbouring village, so that they're kind of happening next to each other, if you like. And then the third one happens in the same village again, and it's about the discovery and the demise of it's about the demise of two brothers who are basically after a treasure which is buried near the village. This buried treasure is actually in the first book, in the second book, and in the third book. So in the third book, the secret of the treasure is revealed.
So this must have taken you quite a long time.
The first book took me a very long time because I was still working, I still had my career and everything. I created the business in that region, and we had an English bookshop there, which Michael ran. I had a design business.
And Michael's your partner, yeah?
Yeah. I had a design business, and I worked for a historic book museum as well, where I was teaching. I was giving workshops about the history of books. And so I was very, very busy. And this started off as a short story. And it just wouldn't go away. Lots of my short stories went away. They were published, and I didn't think about them anymore. But this one just would not go away. So it was in the offing a long time ago. And then when we came back to England after 20 years in France, then a time came where I wasn't so busy. And then suddenly I just spent... Most of this was written in the cafes around Cheltenham. So I like going out in Cheltenham because it's very small, you can walk everywhere, there are cafes where you can sit and people leave you alone, and that's what I do. And I go to one particular cafe where I know all the waiters and all the waitresses. When I arrive, they greet me like family. We chat for 2 minutes, but then they know to leave me alone.
So it's a bit of an escape.
Well, it's an escape in the sense that no phone rings, nobody can shout from downstairs, what are we having for lunch, and so on and so forth. So if I spend an hour or two sitting in the cafe writing, I do as much work as I probably would do in the whole day at home.
Now, you've had a lifetime's work, haven't you? Because you were working for a magazine in the past?
Yes. I mean, I started when I studied art in London. I came to England to learn English, actually, and I learned it very, very quickly. And I studied art at Chelsea School of Art. And the first thing I did, I actually spent 10 years translating films, mostly simultaneous, for the British Film Institute, because they owned the National Film Theatre at the time, and they had 3 cinemas in this complex, and they used to run whole seasons of a particular filmmaker, either in French or in German, because I do German as well. So that was my life of translation, and basically getting the skills of really writing good dialogue. I love writing dialogue, and this book has lots of dialogue in it because it's a good way of actually not boring people with long passages of narrative. And it also means that people that can actually really say things from the heart, rather than somebody else writing about what they think.
What sort of feedback have you had so far? I'm interested in the French feedback as well as the English.
I don't have any French feedback as such at the moment because I'm not living in France. I'm sort of fairly disconnected from there. I know the people in Paris and in Germany have ordered the book. It's been out a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But it's essentially a book written in English. So I think for it to break into the French market, I would actually have to translate it, or to break into the German market, I would have to translate it as well.
And it's called The Fool's House, and it's available in proper book form, and presumably also...
Kindle.
Yeah.
And on Kindle, yes. It's called The Fool's House because there's a link with Hamlet, actually. Because this old man, it turns out, has a fascination with Hamlet's Ophelia, and also with the painting that Millet did of Ophelia lying drowned in the pond. So that there is a link, and there's sort of, at the chapter heads, there are quotes from Hamlet. So there's a kind of, that's why it's called The Fool's House, because Hamlet quotes The Fool's House.
So people better get on and read it, because you've got the next one coming out in April.
I will have the next one coming out in April, because that's finished already. That's already finished. It's just sitting there waiting for a last proof, and then will be published. And so I'm quite happy about that.
Or maybe you'll come and talk to us about that.
I will do, with pleasure. Yes,
Better.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for talking to me. Just a minute, let me...
Then this one.
Subtle. Subtle as a breeze block. Have you got a copy of the book?
Yes, would you like one?
Yes, please.
Oh, you have to
read
read it there.
Oh yeah, I'd like to read it.
It's